Hi, my name is Justin Flint. I'm an attorney and a realtor in Sugar Land, Texas. And today in this video, I'm going to talk to you about the importance of vetting and understanding the HOA of a neighborhood you're going to move into or you're considering moving into. The HOA is the Homeowners Association. Sometimes that's called a Property Owners Association or Condominium Association if you're in a set of condos. In Texas, HOAs, which is what I'm going to refer to them generally as in this video, have a lot of power. They have the power to enforce what are called deed restrictions, which are contractual agreements that you accept by purchasing the property to do or refrain from doing certain things. Those things include the style and specifications of buildings on the property, the allowance of certain pets on the property, usage for farmland, for instance, which is not very common in most HOAs. But there are a number of things that the HOA has the right to restrict or require you to do, keep your lawn in good maintenance, those sorts of things through the deed restrictions. And as part of a residential transaction, you will get a copy, or you should get a copy, of your what we call DCCRs, your declarations, covenants, restrictions, and all of those sorts of things are in your DCCRs. And the DCCRs are usually created by the neighborhood developer and filed to create those restrictions, and then they become applicable to anybody who purchases property in that neighborhood, so long as they are aware of the DCCRs. And the law says if they've been filed in the real property records, everybody's aware of them. So whether you have actually read them or not, and you're buying property in a community that has an HOA, you will be subject to the rules of that HOA, the bylaws and voting and management of the HOA, and then the restrictions that are on your property. So it's always a good idea to look at those restrictions and make sure that you know what you're getting into, that you are allowed to use the property as you want. If you have any special desires for ways you're going to expand the house or build on the property or use the property, you need to make sure in advance that your HOA restrictions, your deed restrictions are going to allow for that. Beyond that, you want to know a little bit about the character of the HOA. As an attorney, it's my experience that HOAs often get very political, and it provides a forum for neighbors who are not the best of neighbors to harass one another or things like that. Combined with the fact that, as I've said, in Texas, HOAs have a tremendous amount of power, you want to know that you are comfortable with the way the HOA operates, how they do business, how strictly they enforce the deed restrictions, how quickly they do, how uniformly they do, and all sorts of things like that. It's usually pretty easy. Your realtor will often know what an HOA is like. For instance, in Sugar Land, we've got First Colony Community Association is one big HOA, and they're very different from an HOA in, say, Quail Valley in Missouri City or something like that. So you need to know the character of your HOA and understand how likely you are to get notices of things that you need to correct, how quickly you're going to get those notices, what the hearing process tends to look like, how the board members tend to perceive issues in their neighborhood, and generally how active the HOA is. Now, in some neighborhoods, you'll want a very active HOA, and that may be exactly what you're looking for, and that can certainly be found in the right places. In others, you may want a more relaxed HOA that's doing something to maintain the appearance and value of properties in that neighborhood, but isn't over assertive in making sure that they're going after people for the size of their grass and their lawn, or for when they pick up their trash cans or things like that. In Texas, the HOA has the right to fine you and assess charges for violations of the deed restrictions. If they do that and those fines go unpaid, then they have the right to institute a lawsuit against you. And when they get a judgment in that lawsuit, under the right circumstances, usually not for fines, but for unpaid assessments. Remember, if you're a member of an HOA, you'll pay yearly dues to the HOA, and that's mandatory. If you don't pay those assessments or things like that, they can get a judgment against you that, in the right circumstances, would allow them to foreclose on your home. That's a big deal and something you need to be considerate of when you're buying property in Texas. Now, I don't mean to scare you too much with that. because most HOAs, in my experience, and the lawsuits I've handled for property owners, do not want to foreclose on property and take property away from homeowners, but it does give them a lot of leverage to get everything they're asking for in terms of what payment they're demanding and those sorts of things. And in those situations, the homeowner doesn't have a whole lot of leverage to fight that very effectively. So you need to know what your DCCRs tell you, your restrictions are, so that you don't run afoul of them. And you need to know how aggressive your HOA is going to be in enforcing those. If you're the type of fastidious person who is always on top of things, has your trash cans in on time, your lawn is always perfectly manicured and those sorts of things, you probably have nothing to worry about. If you're like most of us and occasionally you forget to bring in your trash can on time and those sorts of things, you want to know how long is it going to be before the HOA comes sending you a letter. They're not going to knock on your door, but they'll send you a letter. And you want to know how to respond, how likely they are to work with you if there's any disputes, not necessarily about deed restriction violations, but about assessment amounts or late fees or things like that, and generally how they do business and whether they uniformly enforce their deed restrictions. I see a lot of neighborhoods, and I don't want to name any in particular, but there are a lot of neighborhoods that are very selective about enforcing their deed restrictions. They'll let one home paint their fence in a color that is technically not allowed by the deed restrictions or the Architectural Control Committee guidelines. But then when another person does the same thing, they go after that person for fines. And that kind of enforcement strategy is not permissible under the law if it's arbitrary or capricious. But that's a very difficult thing to prove in court. And quite honestly, you don't want to be fighting with the HOA in court. If the HOA is giving you a lot of trouble, that's going to make you not enjoy that home. So it's my recommendation you get to know, you ask the neighbors, you ask your realtor about what the HOA is like, how strict they are, and make sure that you're prepared to live in that kind of neighborhood if that's where you want to go. Better to do that in advance than to find out later that the HOA is somebody you're going to have constant problems with. And if you have problems with them once, there's a good chance that your personalities, the personalities of the board members and those sorts of things, are going to chafe against yours, and you're going to continue to have a problem. And that's going to kill the enjoyability of your property, which is one of the most important things we want in selecting a property. That's going to be a place we want to live, we want to go home to, we feel comfortable and relaxed in. So do your homework, ask your realtor, ask neighbors, check in about the HOA, and see what they're like, and make sure that you're happy with that and can accept that when you're looking for your homes. Thanks for listening.